the suppressor ruling that could end the NFA. What if I told you that one Supreme Court decision just lit the fuse to blow apart the entire National Firearms Act? Not next year, not someday, but right now, because this wasn't a 5-4 decision. It wasn't 6-3. It was unanimous. All 9 justices, including those appointed by presidents who opposed gun rights, sided together in a ruling that's shaking the legal system to its core. The case was about suppressors, but the fallout? It goes far beyond that. This ruling, combined with a leaked DOJ memo, buried ATF crime data, a constitutional crisis 90 years in the making, and billions of dollars in suppressed corruption, is now unraveling everything the gun control establishment tried to keep hidden. If you own a suppressor, want one, or just believe the Second Amendment is not optional, then you need to hear what just happened. Because this isn't just a win. This is the start of a complete legal revolution. You're about to see how a single ruling could dismantle the most powerful gun law in American history. Chapter 1. The Supreme Court speaks, united, unyielding. The court's decision wasn't split, shaky, or partial. It was unanimous. Every justice agreed. That sends a message. They dismantled decades of government arguments against suppressors, and they did it in a 47-page opinion that will echo through future cases. They rejected every major government justification for suppressor bans. The opinion referenced historical precedent to extend Second Amendment protections. Judges appointed by traditionally anti-gun administrations joined in the ruling. The decision resets the legal landscape for all NFA items, not just suppressors. A unanimous ruling means fewer escape hatches for opponents to argue around. It gives strength to appeals, challenges, and legal arguments nationwide. Suppressors may be the entry point, but this case has much broader doors swinging open. Chapter 2. The DOJ reverse a stunning flip. This case would already be news if it were just the court ruling, but the DOJ's reversal is what makes this historic. They walked back their prior stance, admitting suppressor restrictions no longer hold up. That shift is not just legal, it's political and structural. A classified internal memo triggered the DOJ's flip. That memo exposed zero measurable crime reduction from suppressor bans. The DOJ's brief now says past restriction logic fails constitutional muster. For the first time in years, the federal government is aligning with expanded gun rights. The DOJ's flip strips away the government's usual backing. It gives challengers a rare path to argue that not only suppressor bans but many NFA controls are flawed. Chapter 3. The hidden memo that changed everything. Behind the scenes, a leaked DOJ memo became the weapon. It revealed that suppressor bans produced no real crime benefit in decades. In fact, data showed states with more suppressors had lower gun crime rates. Once that document went public, the DOJ's hands were tied. They had to take a new legal position. The memo showed suppressors were involved in fewer than 0.003% of firearm crimes. States with higher suppressor ownership recorded lower crime stats. The ATF's internal reports allegedly buried this information for years. The timing of the leak aligned sharply with the Supreme Court's decision. That memo gave challengers a factual foundation to call the restrictions arbitrary. It turned suppressor bans from legal debate into a constitutional emergency. Chapter 4. Decades of legal error exposed. The DOJ's reversal opened up a much deeper problem. For nearly a century, federal courts have applied an intermediate scrutiny standard to NFA items. But under Bruin's logic, that standard may be unconstitutional. That means thousands of cases may rest on flawed foundations. Courts relied on balancing tests instead of historical tradition. Legal scholars now argue that those tests are inconsistent with Supreme Court precedent. An analysis of recent NFA cases finds 89% used now disfavored standards. The ruling may ripple into short-barreled rifles, machine guns, and more. This is bigger than suppressors. It's about correcting 90 years of misapplied doctrine. The court's opinion may explicitly overrule parts of that doctrine, and that shift will reshape how all NFA litigation is viewed moving forward. Chapter 5. The cover-up unraveled. The leaks and legal shifts only scratch the surface. FOIA documents and internal communications reveal a decades-long effort to block Supreme Court review. The DOJ and ATF allegedly settled or suppressed cases that could bring constitutional challenges. They worked to keep this issue buried until now. Senior DOJ memos show a strategy to prevent NFA cases from reaching the Supreme Court. Internal emails warned NFA enforcement apparatus would collapse overnight if constitutional review took hold. Authorities coordinated to resolve cases quietly before appeal. This systemic behavior kept constitutional questions from being litigated. This is not just negligence. This was a deliberate firewall built to preserve a legal structure that may now be unconstitutional. And now, that firewall has cracked. Chapter 6. A billion-dollar machine built on bad law. What if the real reason suppressors stayed restricted wasn't about safety but profit? Documents released through FOIA show how the government built an entire enforcement empire around suppressors. Federal agencies, private law firms, and industry gatekeepers have been cashing in on the complexity for decades, and now that money trail is under threat. The federal government collects over $240 million yearly from NFA tax stamps. A TF employs more than 800 agents solely for NFA enforcement. The NFA compliance industry generates over $1.8 billion per year. Legal trusts, dealer markups, and artificial scarcity all depend on these regulations staying in place. These numbers reveal what's really at stake. Not just legal theory, but billions in salaries, contracts, and regulatory cash. And the moment the legal basis crumbles, the business model follows. Chapter 7. The foreign influence nobody talks about. This story gets even darker because it's no longer just domestic politics. Congressional reports reveal that foreign governments, including members of the EU, have been quietly lobbying to keep America's suppressor laws intact. Why? Because they use our laws as justification for their own disarmament policies. Intelligence briefings showed direct lobbying by foreign officials to U.S. lawmakers. Over $47 million have been funneled into U.S. gun control groups since 2015. European diplomats used NFA laws to defend their bans in international forums. At least 12 major DOJ decisions were influenced by foreign diplomatic pressure. This isn't a conspiracy. This is a documented influence. Other nations are passing laws that restrict your rights, so they can keep restricting theirs. And now that alliance is unraveling. Chapter 8. The science finally breaks through. Suppressor bans were sold on fear. Silent weapons, criminal tools, movie-style fiction. But real acoustic data and peer-reviewed studies now prove the truth. Suppressors reduce hearing loss and pose no actual risk to public safety. Suppressed firearms still produce 120 to 140 decibels of noise. That's louder than a rock concert or a jackhammer, not silent. Medical studies show suppressors cut permanent hearing damage by 73%. Europe, with stricter gun laws, actively encourages suppressor use for hunting. This research changes everything. The myth of the silent assassin is gone, and what's left is a legitimate medical device being regulated like a machine gun. Chapter 9. The cover-up collapses in real time. The court's decision didn't happen in isolation. It was the final crack in a system built on selective data, buried memos, and judicial avoidance. For decades, the DOJ and ATF kept the lid on NFA reform. But in 2025, that lid finally blew off. Memos warned of NFA collapse if reviewed under modern constitutional tests. DOJ officials admitted using outdated legal standards in internal emails. Court cases were settled early to prevent SCOTUS involvement. The Bruin precedent exposed the legal error and forced everything into the light. The most important part of this collapse isn't what's already happened, it's what comes next. Because this isn't a one-time event, it's the start of a legal chain reaction. Chapter 10. What happens next could reshape everything. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision is only the first domino. Now that the precedent has shifted, other NFA items, short-barreled rifles, destructive devices, and even machine guns, may face direct legal challenge. The landscape is no longer stable, it's active, and it's changing fast. Legal teams are already filing cases to expand this ruling's scope. NFA registries and tax stamps could be deemed unconstitutional. ATF enforcement programs may be reduced or disbanded. New state-level lawsuits will use this ruling to strike down restrictions. The next 30 to 60 days will define the future of gun rights in America. We are entering a legal storm, and it's moving fast. Now is the time to stay alert and stay prepared. The fight is turning, and this time, in our favor. For nearly a century, Americans were told that suppressors were dangerous, that they had to be restricted, that the government's framework was unshakable. But now, that foundation is crumbling, and for the first time in decades, the momentum has shifted in your favor. We track the real fights, so subscribe right now, because this was not just a win, it was the start of something much bigger. The courts are moving, the truth is coming out, and the Second Amendment is no longer on defense. Stay trained, stay informed, and most of all, stay free.